Hey guys, welcome to Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa. On this episode, we'll be talking about the much-delayed second album from Tinashe, along with new music from King Tuff and Mouse on Mars. Well guys, thanks so much for clicking play on the show. The first album up for review here is the second release from R&B singer Tinashe. This is called Joyride. Now this album finally comes out after many delays. I'm not really sure what's going on between her and her label, but it looks like they weren't really seeing eye to eye. She released a great debut in 2014 with Aquarius that I was a big fan of, and then after that, just delay after delay. I'm not really sure what the issue was there, but she did release a mixtape with a bunch of other material last year. So I'm just glad that we finally get to see this second album from her. And what we get here is kind of like a mixed bag of stuff. Some stuff is a little bit more of like a soulful, mature sound, and other stuff sounds like it's more geared towards pop radio. Also, something that happens quite often on this album is we have these short little intros or interludes that then lead us into the next track. And they kind of try to set up the lyrical theme of what's going to happen on this track. And that's how the album gets started, with the intro track, Keep Your Eyes on the Road, which I didn't really find a need for. It's just a bunch of cars revving up and telling you to enjoy the ride that you're about to go on. Because then it goes into Joyride, which is the first proper track. This has a more aggressive, futuristic sound on the beat, and I was reading that this was actually meant for Rihanna, and Rihanna didn't end up using it, so Tinashe was able to buy the song back. And but you can definitely hear that on the sound of this track, and even on her vocal. I thought this song was okay, as she goes on to talk about enjoying the ride that is life. The next track is one of the singles released from the album No Drama, which has a feature from Offset of Migos. This has a decent trap beat, but I didn't really find any kind of depth in the lyrics, which, it's a pop song, so, there doesn't really need to be. But at least, the verses here should connect to the chorus a little bit more, and they really don't. And Offset really doesn't do anything to add to this track, instead of just, being a hype man. He Don't Want It is one I enjoyed a little bit more. This has more of a sultry R&B sound, as her vocals kind of go into this higher register. And here she's talking about those guys that have missed out on her love. Ooh La La is a track that gives us a more hip-hop flavored beat, and it's a real sexual track. And there's actually some bed creaks that are thrown in all throughout this song, which actually kind of made it sound a little silly in my mind. Me So Bad is another single released from the album, and this one was very much so-so. This has features from Ty Dolla $ign and French Montana, as it's very much a party song. It has a very tropical pop sound, as she's claiming to have exactly what you want. Both guys on here really do little to elevate the song. Here we have another one of those short little interludes. This was called Ain't Good For You, in which she's kind of just stating what the lyrical theme is for the next track, how she's really not good for you, so you need to stay away. But then the track that it leads into stuck with me. I actually really enjoyed. This has a feature from Yukimi Nagano of Little Dragon. And I like the beat on here. It has kind of like a steel beat sound. And like I said, here they're just kind of warning this guy to prepare themselves for the weekend, because they're stuck with her, and that doesn't sound like it's going to be too pleasant. Go Easy On Me is another interlude, and this one's only about 30 seconds long, in which she's kind of stating that she wants this guy to comfort her and not add more drama into her life. And then this leads us into the next track, Salt, which has the same theme, with the lyrics, as she's saying, if you're going to hurt her, at least don't pour any salt on the wound. And this was actually one of my favorites on the album. The production on here reminded me a lot of what was going on in her debut, with a lot more of a soulful live instrumental sound. Faded Love is another single from the album, and this is probably the strongest one of the three. This has a feature from Future, and I think they both go really well. His little auto-tune vocals really mix well with her on this track. And this is another one that's a lot more sexual, as she's talking about just feeling the moment and making the most of it. No Contest was another one of the stronger songs on this album. This one gives us a slower, sultry R&B sound. Here she's saying that there's really no contest when it comes to loving you. And then the album closes with the piano ballad Fires and Flame, in which she's wanting to be there to support someone that could really use her company. Overall, I was so-so about this album. You know, it kind of starts off a little rocky with stuff that's a little bit more geared towards the radio, and it isn't until the second half and when we get into a much more mature R&B sound, which I enjoy more coming from her. And also, I'm a little disappointed. It's 37 minutes. After years of being delayed, we get such a short album, but still, despite all the different delays, there's still enough in here to really keep you satisfied. I ended up giving this album a score of a 6.5 out of 10. So if you're a fan of Tinashe, definitely go ahead and check this out. And if you're just a casual fan, maybe just stick to the songs that I mentioned were some of my favorites. Next for review, we have the fourth studio album from King Tuff. This is called The Other. Now this album is being released through Sub Pop Records, and it has a lot of different musical friends that he has helping him out on it. Like, for example, we have Michael Cronin, who has a career of his own, laying down some saxophone on some of these tracks. Ty Segall, which released an album earlier this year, he does drumming on most of these tracks. And then he has people like Jenny Lewis, Greta Morgan, and Kevin Morby all contributing background vocals throughout the album. This is my first time listening to King Tuff, and I know that some friends liked him before in the past because he had more of a garage rock sound. But here, he takes on more of a psychedelic pop sound, which, it would have been nice to have the guitar ripping through a little bit more than we hear, but still, it amounted to an enjoyable listen. We're going to start this album up at the top with the title track, The Other. This is a soft opener with organ, keys, and eventually we get some tranquil guitar picking. Here he's talking about searching far and wide for the other. Now, that can be left for your interpretation as to what you think the other could be, but for me, it kind of seems like he's talking about a meaning to life. I'm a big fan of the next track, Raindrop Blue. This has more of like a glammy strut to it, with a really big elephant stomping beat, thubbing bass, and saxophone throughout. On here, he talks about how electric and alive this girl makes him feel, but also how blue and broken he is without her. Through the Cracks is a mellow acoustic track with very lush background vocals and guitar slides. Here, he's singing about a friend that, kind of left in a flash, no longer here. And it really makes you think that, eventually we're all going to fall through those cracks. Psycho Star gives us another stubby beat with big bass groove and an electric piano. This one eventually develops into a more glam rock sound with the lush background vocals that come in. Here he talks about the wonder to be living on this strange rock. Infinite Mile is a spacey acoustic track with harmonica and wild instrumental breaks. Here he's stating how great it feels to have found you on the infinite mile. Birds of Paradise also gives us more of a glam rock sound, as this includes horns and real catchy moments. as he's talking about remembering what it's like to be a kid and being carefree and holding the world with such wonder, and now you just end up being a broken adult. But don't worry, because King Tuff is here to remind you what it's like to be a kid again. Circuits in the Sand is another acoustic track, but this one comes with some electric guitar flourishes, as he's talking about remembering a time when we weren't so addicted to technology, and how he'd kind of like to return to this moment, because it feels like that's when we felt most alive. Neverending Sunshine is one that's led in by a hypnotic keyboard line and has an overall psychedelic sound. I felt that the chorus on here was a little clumsy and weak, but the parts leading into it were really catchy. Here he's talking about how much he loves the sun and how it's basically one day gonna engulf the earth, but he seems to be okay with that. And then the album closes with No Man's Land, which gives us an overall psychedelic pop sound. This one starts off softer with some harp-like sounds, but then has these big key swell-ups at the chorus. And at the end, we finally get to hear that guitar come out and burst through and come to life. I thought this was a pretty enjoyable listen. Again, I would have maybe appreciated more guitar work to get more of that garage rock sound that he had in the past, but I was still pretty satisfied with what I got. I'm going to give this album a 7.5 out of 10. So if you're interested in checking out some pretty good psychedelic pop, you can't go wrong with checking this album out. And the last album we'll be talking about for this episode is the 14th studio album from the German duo Mouse on Mars. This is called Dimensional People. Now this is a group I'm not familiar with at all. I was kind of looking for something more electronic based, and I thought that's what I was getting with this album, and it really wasn't. This is a lot more experimental than I expected. There's tons of people helping out on this album, creating all this sonic experimentation. We have the Dessner brothers from the band The National. We also have Justin Vernon, who's best known by his name Bon Iver. He's on here as well. And we also get vocals from Amanda Blank and Swamp Dogg throughout this album. And at the end too, let me not forget that we have Zach Conan from the band Beirut also providing some vocals. So we're going to start this album off at the top with the tracks Dimensional People 1, 2, and 3. So this is divided into 3 different parts. So the first track here starts off with quick bleeps, synths, sustained sax notes, and this fast tribal rhythm, as it then segues, which is very subtle, into the next track. And here the quick rhythms continue, which we get a big pounding kick drum. And then we start introducing some subtle guitar work and some of Justin Vernon's vocal flourishes throughout. As we get into the third part, his voice becomes more prominent as we actually get more structured verses along with some ad-libs from him. And this has a much more tranquil sound with these quiet moments with horns and bass that I enjoyed. Foul Mouth has 3 different sections of its own. It starts off sounding like something you'd be hearing from an alien spaceship, and then this segues into a moment where we have Amanda Blank come in, and she's doing a little bit of rapping, which I don't know how well it fits within the song, but the segue wasn't that bad, as it then takes another turn into something with a smoother guitar sound. Although the 3 different parts were very different, I thought they all shifted through pretty well. Aviation gives us more of a dreamier sound with interwoven guitar lines, vocal effects, and a suited feature from Spank Rock. Parliaments of Alien Part 1 is a very experimental track. This one starts off with these continuous synth drops just over and over again. Just goes up and down. Then vocals come in with violins and these bleepy beats. Then we get back to Parliament of Aliens Part 2, as we get a thumping beat with various swirling effects. This is a real feast for your ears. But then we get into the last part, Part 3, and this was only 33 seconds long, and really shouldn't have been a separate track. Could have just been a continuation of the second part. That would have been okay. Resume gives us vocals from Swamp Dogg as he starts off talking about his life and the resume that he's leaving behind, basically his legacy. And here we get the closest thing that we have to a beat, as it's assisted by synth effects and skeletal guitar work. And then the album closes with Sydney in a Cup, which was one of my personal favorites. This has a more prominent vocal from Zach Condon, and has a really nice gentle effect. And then we're let out by some spoken word from Swamp Dogg. Overall, I thought this was so-so. It kind of caught me a little off guard. I thought I was going to be listening to something more electronic, and I ended up with something more experimental, which is okay. But, when your mind is kind of expecting something and you don't get that in return, it kind of turns you off a little from the album. But yet, there's a lot of interesting things going on here, so I at least appreciate the album on that level. And the tracks here, if you're really open to them, there's definitely some gems in here. Overall, this is going to get a score of a 6 out of 10 from me. So if you're in the mood for checking out something more experimental, with, a lot of variety in sounds and a feast for your ears, then go ahead and give this a listen. Well, guys, that's it for this episode. I hope you liked my reviews. If you did, or even if you didn't, feel free to leave me a little bit of feedback down there at the bottom. And if you have any albums that you want me to check out, feel free to leave those down there as well. And while you're there, go ahead and hit the like button, or you can always subscribe and know what's coming up next. On that next episode, I'll be talking about new projects from J. Cole and A Perfect Circle. So be on the lookout for that.